If you're like me, you've always respected the Navitimer, but you've never wanted to wear one on your wrist. Well, before you give up on the original wrist calculator, you should watch this video. I'm Max and welcome back to Hot Ones. So I recently took a trip to New York and I wanted to travel light and not bring like half a dozen watches with me. So I was going through my watch box looking for something classy, iconic, but also versatile. Now I've had this Navitimer for a while and haven't made a video about it, I guess because I wasn't quite ready to talk about it yet. See, the Navitimer doesn't quite have the straightforward story of something like a Speedmaster. I mean, for example, the Speedmaster equates to the Apollo moon missions, and something like the Explorer is associated with Mount Everest. But what do you think about when someone says navigational timer? Well, just like the writing on its dial, the Navitimer story is a little more complicated. But first, what we have here is perhaps the best Navitimer for skinny wrists. The Navitimer 92 had a production run of 4 years, from 1992 to 1996. At 38 millimeters wide and 12 millimeters thick, it addresses one of the biggest complaints about the Navitimer, namely that it's too big. This particular model, the A30022, comes in both black and blue dials, and I've also seen it in gold. But I believe the blue is the most sought after variant, because it has this deep ocean blue that has a bit of sunburst iridescence when seen off angle, offering just more depth than your normal black dial. The early 90s tritium has also aged to a lovely khaki color, providing a bit of warmth that gives this watch an undeniable vintage charm. But being in that sort of neo-vintage range, it also has modern perks like a sapphire crystal. Maybe thanks to the Paul Newman Daytona, we all know how popular the panda or reverse panda color scheme for chronographs have become. And here, these white subdials are perfectly spaced, not too close, not too far, with running seconds at 3, an hour counter at 6, and minutes at 9, giving this watch that quintessential tri-register chronograph look. The lack of a date window further simplifies this dial, leaving more space for the design to breathe. The silvery white color is reflected in the rotating bezel, which actually sits behind the dial. The bezel has a deep knurling that makes for a confident grip, and instead of the standard Navitimer slide rule, here we have a less busy telemeter scale. Now, telemeters utilize the difference between the speed of light and sound to calculate distance. For example, if you start the chronograph when you see a flash of lightning, then stop it when you hear the thunder, the watch will tell you how far the storm is. Now, in military applications, the same principle can be applied to things like mortars and bombs. So what makes the Navitimer such an icon? Well, Breitling's story is synonymous with the birth of the chronograph. The company is credited with everything from inventing the first automatic chronograph movement, working alongside Heuer and Buren, and even as far back as defining where the start and stop pushers are placed, namely at the 2 and 4 o'clock positions. But I feel like I didn't really understand the Navitimer until I found an analogy with the Speedmaster, and you guys know that the Speedmaster is well featured on this channel. So I think what the Speedmaster is to spaceflight, the Navitimer is to aviation. See, in 1942, Willy Breitling, the grandson of Leon Breitling, who started the company in 1884, introduced the chronomat, or a chronograph for mathematicians and other technical fields. And that was the first watch to feature the slide rule bezel. The Navitimer really inherited this bezel about a decade later in 1954 in the form of the reference 806. And this watch quickly gained popularity with pilots and was eventually adopted by the Aircraft Owners and Pilot Association, or AOPA. And this insignia is found on many Navitimers of the day. The slide rule, which admittedly I'm still trying to fully understand, operates on a logarithmic scale and can be used to quickly calculate things like distance, fuel consumption, rate of altitude change. It probably also helped that many aircrafts of the day said Breitling right on their instruments as well. In fact, when asked about his watch, a retired Navy test pilot exclaimed, "I needed my Navitimer so I could do my calculations." So this wasn't just a trinket, this was a tool. So unlike the full-size Navitimer, the Navitimer 92 houses an ETA 2892 with a D&D chronograph module. You can tell this by observing the watch from the side and seeing the offset pushers from the crown. And I'm gonna make that Speedmaster comparison again. So I think if the Navitimer 806 is the Speedy Pro, then the Navitimer 92 would be like the Speedmaster reduced. Both smaller versions of these watches use modular chronograph movements that keep the watch economical, thin, and with just one concern being higher service costs than something like a Valjoux. Now on my 6.5-inch wrist, it's hard to find a better descriptor of this watch other than perfect. The watch offers wrist presence without being so big that the lugs overhang, and these lugs slightly turn downward together with a thin case means that it sits tight under cuffs. The watch also comes with a very comfortable and stylish bracelet with solid links. Each section has that slanted look so distinct to Breitling. But I mostly prefer it on this nose-time vintage Horween leather strap fitted to a original Breitling deployant buckle. The strap is just 2mm thin, accentuating the watch's unobtrusive size, and this pale brown leather really brings out the lume's warm patina. Yes, looking at the dial, there's still just a lot going on, including small pops of red accentuating the arrow tip of the chronograph hand, and small writings on the bezel. But step back a bit and this classic blue and white contrast is really refreshing and clean. Now, turning the watch over, the screw-down caseback is equally lovely, featuring the Breitling wings insignia engraved in the center. All in all, this is a really charming little watch that wouldn't look out of place paired with a suit or a t-shirt, which is why I chose it for my trip. Yes, Breitling has had sort of a checkered period, especially after the quartz crisis, that I think they're still recovering from, but the Navitimer, I think, is one of those watches that transcends time and will really get the watch nerds excited. So I would say if you have a bigger wrist, look into like a vintage 806, or they made a 60th year re-edition of that watch in 2019. But if you want to go off the beaten path, and especially if you always thought the Navitimer was too big or cluttered, then the Navitimer 92 will surely change your mind, as it did for me. Okay guys, be sure to drop a like for this video. Also consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And let me know in the comments below if you love or hate the Navitimer, because I feel like this is a really polarizing watch and people have very strong opinions. Anyways, thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.